Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-05. Story 1, I kidnapped a child and I have no regrets. Hello there. Clear blue sky, a gentle breeze blowing through the suburbs, the smell of freshly cut grass and a confused little girl staring up at me, sitting in her own little corner far far away from the other children. Mousy little thing with long blonde hair in a ponytail, wearing a plain white shirt with some logo, pink skirt and blue pants underneath. She looked just as anxious as I was feeling. Mew mew measles I can talk to strangers. Sorry? My mummy says I can't talk to strangers. I squatted and looked right into her eyes. She looked at her shoes. Well, my name is Christopher and I'm a friend of your mummy, actually. She turned her head slightly. Really? Michelle Bain, tall, messy brown hair, big nose, baggy eyes? Yeah. So what's your name? Emily. Emily Bain. You want to get some ice cream? But, my teacher. It's right around the corner. We'll be back in 5 minutes. I held her hand in mine as we made our way to the mall right next to the school. The ice cream man handed us both soft serve with sprinkles, her favorite. She mumbled thank you. He laughed and complimented me for raising such a polite young girl. We finished our ice cream sitting outside and I even got to wipe her nose off, all white and sprinkled. She giggled really hard at that. Instead of heading back, I took us to the toy store across the ice cream place. Come on, you can pick anything you want. Don't worry about it, okay? Oh, okay. After much badgering she finally picked out a Freddy plushie, you know, one of those evil robots from that Five Nights at Freddy game. I don't get it myself. Just as we were heading back to school through the parking lot, a woman in the distance spotted us and sprinted our way. Middle-aged woman, brown pixie cut, glasses, kind of cute. Far out in the distance I could see smoke rising. Emily, where were you? We were looking all over for you. I'm sorry, I interjected. I took her out for some ice cream. She gave me the stink eye. And you are? Christopher, family friend. Ah, I see. Well, we really must get going now. It's an emergency, so goodbye. As the teacher dragged her back, Emily looked to me and waved and I waved right back. Poor thing didn't even realize what was in store for her. It's quite strange, really. A freak incident in our little town. Faulty wiring, huge fire, single mother, knocked out cold and perished. No other family in the picture. Such a shame. But Emily recognized me when I came to visit her at the police station and I had a clean sheet and a stable income, so soon she was mine for the grabbing. Today is her birthday, actually. Just me, her and a few uncles. She doesn't like crowds, you see. We all doted on her, spoiled her rich, ate some cake and had a couple of beers. Yet I can't sleep. I entered her bedroom and sat right next to her. Sound asleep. I pulled her shirt up. The scars are still there, right on her back. I kidnapped a child and I don't regret a thing. Story 2, The Drowning Trees. 7 people setting out in a small pontoon boat probably wasn't the best idea to begin with. We were just small town kids being kids, barely old enough to buy the cases of beer we brought, leaving the marina close to sundown to party on the lake and blow off some steam. As soon as we cleared the last slip, Ace McGavin let out a whoop and gunned the oversized Yamaha. Smooth water and soft coral sky stretched ahead of us, while churning waves and heavy metal music spread out in our wake. A week after Labor Day, the lake was all but deserted. No development had ever been allowed around Kahulawasi Lake since the river was dammed in the late 70s, so the only sources of traffic were campgrounds and lodges like the one the McGavins belonged to. By dark, we knew there'd be nobody out there to bump into or tell us to keep it down. It was party time. Ace cranked up Enter Sandman with the little boat's speakers as loud as they would go. We sped along, fueled with music, beer, and the usual rumor brag insult fest. It was mostly good-natured, being early in the evening, and the girls were drinking as fast as the guys. Pretty soon, we reached the middle of the lake, and Ace turned the engine off to let us drift with the current. We lit tiki torches at the corners of the boat, and Metallica segued into Converge, Gorguts and other bands as the sky and the lake faded to black around us. We carried on boisterously for a while until Shelley Draper turned the volume down. "That's enough loud music," she said. "Ace, tell us one of your war stories." Ace leaned back in the captain's chair, pulled Shelley into his lap, and started recounting one of his harrowing adventures as a saw gunner in Kandahar province. I only had eyes for the far corner of the boat, where Debbie Lane and Grace Wilford shared a single fishing chair. Rob Tanner leaned close to me as he dug a beer out of the cooler. "Wish you was up in that chair, Don?" he asked me. "I wish I was that chair," I said, and we both got to laughing. Ace finished his story, then got the boat moving, but slower this time. "We're going to the dark, deserted inlet beach," he informed us. "Somebody tell us a ghost story to get us in the mood." We took turns as we dawdled toward the barely visible tree line under low power. Silly stories like the Muddy Hand mingled with more sinister tales like the Woolfolk Plantation axe murders. That one used to be my favorite. Without warning, the boat lurched in the water as Big Ed Broward stood up from the other forward chair. "I'm feeling the need," he announced, and turned toward the rail. Grace and Debbie screeched and cowered away. Rob and I were both like, "No, buddy, don't do it," and Shelley buried her face in Ace's chest. Ace yelled like a drill instructor, "Hey, there is no whizzing in, on, or from my daddy's boat. Jump in the lake if you gotta go. You got that, Ed?" Ed looked sheepish. "Guess I can wait," he said, and sat back down. "Why don't you just go on in?" Grace asked. "Don't like the deep water." Ed looked down. "I only swim close to shore." While we were all laughing at him, I noticed Shelley whispering to Ace. "Bathroom break," Ace said as he dropped us into neutral and told Rob to throw out the anchor. He reversed for a few seconds to set it and killed the engine. Shelley stripped down to her swimsuit before the boat was secured, and the rest of us were right behind her. Except for Ed. He'd shotgunned his first beer before we even untied from the floating dock, and had probably gone through at least 6 more since then, but he wasn't moving. "Too deep," he replied to our teasing "Hey, before we jump in, which way does the water flow?" Debbie asked. "I wanna be upstream from y'all." Everyone had enough of a buzz that we found this absolutely hilarious. Ace opened a compartment and tossed 2 old fishing floats over the side. One of them bobbed right back up and moved slowly toward the bow. The other one never resurfaced. "Bum float," Ace said. "Looks like back of the boat's upstream. No diving by the engine." One by one, we slipped down the deck ladder into the cool, dark water. Ed sat silently on the boat while the rest of us paddled in and out of the circle of torchlight, laughing and splashing. I guess after a while, Ed just had enough. The boat rocked as he climbed onto the rail where Ace had thrown out the floats. "Use the ladder," we yelled, but it was no good. Ed hollered Geronimo, and dropped the hammer with a deep cannonball dive. Water fountained over the boat and everybody close to that side. A big ring from Ed's dive rolled by. Gentle ripples followed, then the water smoothed out. We waited and waited for Ed to pop back up. Grace started calling his name, and we all joined in. "Ed? You out there past the torches? Dude can hold his breath. He's teasing us, he's between the hulls. Better come out, Ed, big spiders under there." Something splashed far off toward the shore, and we heard a sound like a person gasping. Was that Ed? It was like 100 yards away. 200. Ed couldn't swim that far if the prize was a turkey leg. Everything was quiet for a second, then another, fainter splash sounded. A ragged scream carried across the water. "Oh my lord," that said. "How could he go that far? He must be caught in a rip current." "Ain't no rip current in a river lake," Ace said. "Who knows what he got himself into?" Back in the boat, we got to go get him. Everybody in, someone grabbed that anchor rope. That was Ace. Say what you will about him, he knew how to take charge. The engine coughed to life after we were all aboard. Rob and I hauled at the anchor rope, which came up so easy that it must have come loose down there. The roar of the engine drowned out all other sound. If Ed yelled again, we didn't hear it. Ace got the boat going so fast the tiki torches gutted out. By the time he slowed again, we could barely see anything in the darkness. The pale blur of the moon behind the clouds was almost no help at all. I could make out the shoreline 100 or so yards away. There were no house lights, just a jagged band of tall black trees marking the line between the dull glow of the sky and its reflection on the water. Ace pulled out 2 handheld waterproof spotlights. "Girls, shine these all around." "Ed, where you at, you sorry son of a..." "He's over there," Debbie shouted. Her light was pointed at the shoreline where the skeletons of 2 huge, fallen trees trailed in the water. Their roots still clung to the shore, but their tops were mostly submerged. Dangling at the tip of one of the dry, white limbs was Ed's big, faded red Coca-Cola hat. Ace cursed quietly and brought the throttle up. "Deb, keep the light on it. Gracie, sweep the other one around." Everybody looked sharp, and you'll get the life preservers ready. The Yamaha kept up a low, burbling growl as it pushed us closer and closer to the fallen trees. Ace had just put the engine in reverse to slow us down when the bow suddenly swung left as though we'd hit something. Grace screamed as she was thrown against the rail. Her light tumbled over the side and sank straight down. She pulled herself back upright and screamed again, much louder, when she looked into the water. We all crowded to the starboard rail to see. Grace's flashlight had fallen to the lake bed maybe 20 feet below, shining upward. In the bright cone of its light, we could see Ed hung up in one of those trees a few feet below the surface, his body caught between 2 big limbs. Only his head moved, swaying slowly from side to side. We were all excited and shouting, trying to figure out how he got there. I'll never know what made Shelley climb up to stand on the rail. She'd had a lot to drink and it sounded like she was losing it. Just as Ace reached toward her, the boat lifted like a wave had passed under it and Shelley's bare feet slipped off the rail. She lost her grip on the bimini strut and fell backwards into the water. Ace called her name and climbed halfway over the rail to reach down for her hand when she came up. In the light of the lost flashlight, though, we could see that instead of swimming upwards, Shelley was falling rapidly toward the lake bottom. Must have knocked her wind out. "I'm going after her," Ace yelled. "Throw that anchor down so I can grab the line, and somebody shut that damn motor off." I jumped to the controls while Rob picked up the stern anchor. None of us stopped to think, we just automatically followed orders. I looked over the side as I fumbled with the ignition key. I saw Shelley deep down in the water, surrounded by a growing cloud of silt. Ace kicked down toward her. I heard the anchor splash and was about to tell the girls to toss in the bow anchor when everything hit the fan at once. Shelley came flying up off the bottom like she was strapped to a rocket. Ace made one futile grab toward her and went spinning in her wake. The boat tipped sharply toward the rear corner, and Rob screamed in pain. The anchor line had pulled taut and trapped his right arm against the rail. I raced around the captain's chair to try to help Rob. Grace and Debbie both screamed and stumbled as the boat jerked and began to swing around, pivoting on the nylon rope that was now cutting deep into Rob's flesh. I got both hands on the line and braced my foot to haul back on it. I heard Grace sobbing and saw Debbie's light shining down onto the partly submerged trees. Between sparkles of light from the water's surface, I saw Shelley tangled in the dead tree right beside Ed. There was blood in the water. Rob's cries brought me back around. The rope had grown even tighter, and I couldn't budge it. I kept yanking on it and yelled for Grace and Debbie to help. Rob collapsed against the rail and went from wailing to crying. The anchor rope had pinched through his forearm all the way to the bone, and blood gushed from the wound. He was going into shock, and I honestly didn't think we'd be able to get him free until either his arm or the rope snapped. The boat's frame shuddered and groaned as the deck tilted under the pull of the anchor line. Grace shrieked and jumped over the side. Debbie sprawled on the deck and her lamp went dark. She screamed for Grace to come back, and struggled to get back up. I begged her to help me get Rob loose, but she just leaned over the rail, crying and reaching out for her friend who was already halfway to the bottom. The light on the lake bed still shone upward, illuminating 3 human figures trapped in the tree branches. One was fighting, the other 2 appeared limp. Debbie grabbed my arm and yelled frantically for me to go after Grace. On my other side, Rob went silent and slumped against me. My hands and shirt were soaked with his blood. Another savage tug on the ropes drained the craft even further. The railing buckled and all three of us slid toward the water. The light at the lake bottom dimmed as sediment and blood flowed around it. Debbie's last scream was cut short as she disappeared beneath the surface, and something icy cold swirled around my leg. I did the only thing I could think to do. I'm not proud of it. I pushed Rob's unconscious body down toward whatever it was that had touched me and struck out hard for the shore, pulling and kicking harder than I ever had in my life. Before I knew it, I was hauling myself up the slope with no regard for my abraded hands, through a hanging curtain of vines and brambles and poison ivy that I wouldn't have attempted before on a dare. After a minute, my adrenaline rush subsided and I sat down to catch my breath and wait for the shakes to pass. Over the sound of my panting, I heard churning water and the bright sound of metal twisting and snapping. All I could see out in the lake were bits of floating wreckage and 6 dark shapes caught in the grasp of the drowning trees. One of them slowly moved an arm, as though waving me back to help. Its elbow was bent in the wrong direction. Then, the light went out and the sounds of destruction ceased. I stayed where I was, shivering in the warm air and waiting for the sun. I listened to the song of a blackbird in the trees high above and the quiet rhythm of water lapping against the lake shore below. The next day, my report led the sheriff's patrol to my friends' bodies. It took a long time to retrieve what was left. The deputies said it looked like each one had hit the submerged trees at speeds over 100 miles per hour, and the branches had acted like a strainer. That part was kept quiet in the official statement, but they said it pretty much ruled me out as a suspect. None of my friends had an open casket funeral. I am never going near a lake again in my life. Story 3, I'm writing this while I still have control of my body. I'm writing this while I still have control of my body. There needs to be a record of what's happening to me, so if it happens to you, at least you'll know, you're not alone. I can't explain what's going on. I can't offer any answers. But I can give you this warning, obey the pattern. If it comes, whatever the pattern tells you, do it. Or you'll end up like me. It began one morning. My eyes opened to the sound of my alarm. The sun hadn't risen yet. Naturally, I went to hit snooze, but my body didn't cooperate. Instead, I sat up and swung off the covers. Instinctually, I tried to shut my eyes and rub them, but my hands wouldn't obey. My eyelids wouldn't obey. They were stuck open. At once, by the volition of some alien will, my body hopped out of bed and walked to the kitchen. Am I sleepwalking? I thought. In the kitchen my body flicked on the lights and proceeded to make coffee. I watched my hands maneuver the grinder, the jar of beans, the kettle, as if watching a silent cooking show shot from first-person point of view. The sound of the grinder cut the stillness, and my head tilted back, letting me stare out the window. Watching my dark reflection, I thought about lucid dreams. The ones where the dreamer becomes conscious of the dream, and assumed that must be what was happening to me. I simply caught myself sleepwalking and my consciousness hadn't emerged from the pool of involuntary operations my body regularly carried out. It breathes for me, I thought, beats my heart to pump blood around for me. All kinds of complicated cellular transactions go on without any input from me. In fact, within me there exists a complete biological economy running smooth as clockwork, so why should it be so weird for my body to make coffee now and then? But, with each passing moment, it became more difficult to convince myself of this. For one, I'd never had a lucid dream before, and as far as I know, I'd never sleepwalked before either. No doubt my son or my ex, both light sleepers, would have mentioned it. Sure, there's a first time for everything, but for a dream, this felt astonishingly real. At the breakfast counter my body ate a hot bowl of porridge, sipped coffee and read the morning news on my phone. A spoonful of grey sludge slid into my mouth for my teeth to chew. My tongue dislodged a sticky lump and swallowed. This sensation struck me as too odd, too surreal. And I began to panic. But I couldn't scream. Desperate, I attempted to will myself awake, yelling "wake up" in my head, as if trying to force a balloon to pop by filling it with loud thoughts. But it was futile, useful as pushing a brick wall with all your strength. And so, ignoring me, my body showered and shaved. As my hand scraped a razor across my face, I searched my eyes for clues. Clues for what, I don't know. Signs of something strange maybe, something to signal this wasn't real. But there was nothing unusual. My familiar reflection stared back at me, expressionless and vacant. In this moment, I was reminded of what a plain-looking guy I am. Mr. Normal. No especially unique features of any kind. I had an office worker haircut, neat, tidy, boring, like the rest of me. Not too tall, not too short, not too handsome but not too ugly, always in the middle. Middle summed me up perfectly. Middle-aged, middle management, middle class. Dressed for work, my body got in the car and drove beneath an overcast sky to the concrete government records building my colleagues and I call the bunker. Walking through the maze of cubicles hung with fluorescent lights, the kind that suck the juice from your eyeballs, my body said hello to everyone, sat down in my office and began working. As it worked I remained imprisoned in my mind, unable to do anything but watch data being created and edited by my possessed hands. Into my ears came the click-clack of the thing typing as my nose drew in the suffocating smell of humid, musty air. During our 10 o'clock coffee break, Alison, one of my staff, laid out a tray of chocolate cupcakes she'd baked the night before. It must be the first Wednesday of the month, I thought. What kind of dream would recreate Alison's cupcake day? God, even my dreams are boring. But this is too real to be a dream. But it's too strange to be real. Back at my desk, I continued assessing everything my body did, trying to spot any differences from how I'd do it. Every emotion, every choice made, mimicked what I would do, except for one thing, my body spent the day without slacking off. In fact, how much work it got done was astounding, not deviating onto social media or random websites like I often did. When it got home, my body prepared noodles and fried vegetables, sat down in front of the couch and watched garbage TV until I fell asleep, exhausted from prolonged strained focus. The next morning, flexing my fingers, I realized I had control back. So it was just a crazy lucid dream all along, I thought. I rose from the couch, went to the mirror and felt my face. The sensation made me smile. But my elation was immediately erased by a single corrosive thought: what if yesterday was real? I checked the date on my phone. Wait, what day was yesterday? I couldn't remember. I must have been so discombobulated by the dream, I forgot. There's got to be a way to check if yesterday really happened, I thought, searching my memories. Then it struck, Alison's cupcakes. Is Alison in yet? I called no one in particular as I rushed into the bunker. A few shook their heads. I paced my office and checked my phone every few seconds until, finally, the bunker door opened and Alison's voice traveled over the cubicles, greeting everyone. She hadn't even put her bag down yet when I commandeered her to my office. So sorry I'm late. She stepped in. I motioned for her to shut the door. She swung it closed, deliberately averting her gaze from mine. Damn cat got out. I had to chase it 2 blocks with a broom. She forced a smile. I don't care that you're late. She turned to me, her sheepishness unchanged. I need to ask you something. My heart rate jumped. Those chocolate cupcakes you brought in yesterday, do you have the recipe? Oh, you liked them? She smiled. I don't use a recipe, it's all up here. She touched a fingernail to her head. I felt the blood drain from my face. Her eyes widened. I can write it down. I shook my head. No, that's, Are you okay? I nodded. That will be all. Dumbstruck, Alison left my office and as soon as she closed the door I fell to my knees and gripped my head in my hands. What happened to me? I thought, pulling my hair until it hurt. Once I composed myself, I told my staff I wasn't feeling well and took the rest of the day off. I couldn't focus. Couldn't think. I searched my symptoms online but no condition described what was happening to me. Nothing except insanity. As I sat at home in front of my computer, mind blank, my hands suddenly moved on their own. My right hand grabbed the mouse, opened a new document, and they both started typing. Obey the pattern. My hands went limp. I had control back. For a long time I stared at the 3 words and considered what to do. My heart couldn't have pounded harder, and it felt like my chest was being constricted with barbed wire. Finally, I typed. What pattern? My hands were commandeered again. Each day you will go to work, come home, watch TV, eat, and then go to bed. You will not deviate from this. Allowances will be made for grocery shopping, gas and other necessities for survival, but no more. If you don't obey the pattern, I will take time away from you. How much time? As much as necessary. What do I do on weekends? Sit and watch TV, periodically go for walks to maintain reasonable fitness, consume the necessary sustenance for survival and sleep. Why are you doing this? Because the pattern must be obeyed. Why? The answer would have no meaning for you. All you need to remember are 3 words, obey the pattern. How long do I have to do this? There is no end. Who are you? I am the pattern. I couldn't type. Power over my hands returned, but I had nothing left to ask. Nothing I could think of. My head felt as if it had just been struck with a hard object. Under my shirt, sweat had coalesced. When I pulled at the collar, a straight line of cold ran down my spine. Waiting in the doctor's office, I cupped my palms over my knees, shut my eyes and rehearsed various chains of words and sentences, but every one broke reason or twisted logic, inevitably betraying my sanity. The doctor, a gaunt woman with round glasses, entered and we greeted each other. How can I help you today? She said, looking not exactly at me. Okay, I rubbed my legs. This is going to sound weird, I realize, but... My mouth contorted and my words turned into mumbles. Tilting her head to the side, the doctor waited. I tried to speak the words, but my mouth didn't cooperate. I'd lost control again. My body coughed a fake cough and then said, sorry. I'm actually fine. I'm wasting your time. I have to go. My body got up. No, I thought. Please help me. This isn't me. With total will, I attempted to speak, to shout for help. But it was futile. The pattern had taken over and decided to leave the room. The doctor asked something, but my body shut the door, cutting her off, and we exited the building. With pace, the pattern took me to my car, got in and drove to work. Why? Why are you doing this? I thought. Casually, it greeted Allison and my other colleagues with a broad smile. The traffic today. It said, twirling into my office like a jackass. Who the hell do you think you are? My mind screamed. Give my body back. Right now. Ignoring me, my body carried out the day as normal, even despite my internal screams, my mental cries, my deluge of derogatory insults and violent threats. At the end of the day, apparently satisfied with its work, it bid goodbye to the remaining staff and went home to repeat the same pattern of healthy eating and TV watching as before. The pattern didn't relinquish control. A day went by, then another. A toxic thought poisoned every other. What if it never returns control? If I could have cried, I would have. To watch the days pass before me, hour after hour, minute after minute, second after second, became excruciating, not only because of my imprisonment but the sheer boredom of viewing my life being lived. God, my life sucks, I thought, as another round of data entry, bland food, bad TV and banal small talk passed by. The monotony of my job and the depressing state of my life hit me with full force. My body went home to no one. Nothing was waiting for me except the TV, which I sat in front of to watch ad nauseam. My life accumulates to nothing, I realized. I have nothing. No one would notice if I never got my body back. At that moment, in the corner of my eye, out of focus, I caught a framed photograph of my son and I on the sideboard. It provided an interval of happiness amidst the misery. Waking to the sensation of my head turning to the side, I opened my mouth and made a long incoherent sound. Wait, I did that, I thought. I have control. Rolling out of bed, I ran up and down the hall, jumping and hollering. Everything was ecstasy, my toes curling against the wooden floorboards, my fingers through my hair, my lips against my skin. God, it was good. I smacked kisses up the length of my arms and all over my hands. I stretched and breathed and repeated, I'm back, I'm back. That morning at work I wrote an email I felt utterly unable to send. It was to Ben, my son, who I hadn't seen in 7 years. For the most part, my ex raised him. A long time ago they moved to the other side of the country, and as a result, I only saw Ben on holidays, but since he turned 20 or so, and moved out on his own, we'd grown apart. The last time I tried to arrange a visit he told me not come, and that if I did, he wouldn't see me anyway. That was 7 years ago. We'd exchanged emails for birthdays and holidays, but for 7 years, that's the only contact I've had with Ben. And this morning I'd written him an email asking if I could visit. The email sat in my drafts folder all day. I opened it and hovered the mouse over the send button. If the pattern takes over my body permanently, I'll never see Ben again, I thought. Then, with a rush of blood to my head, I pushed send. It took 2 days for Ben to reply, but when he did I was overjoyed. He wanted to see me, and in his email he explained how bad he felt that we'd become so estranged. He wanted a new start, a positive start. I booked everything right away. At home that night, at my computer, my hands were taken over by the pattern again. What are you planning? I want to see my son. When? Soon. Maybe later this month. I'd like to fly there and meet him. I'd need some time off work. No. Why not? It deviates from the pattern. So what? If you deviate I will take more time. How about this, when I get back I'll follow the pattern for as long as you want. I just want to see my son. No. Unacceptable. You will follow the pattern as normal. Why are you doing this to me? Obey the pattern. Why? I stared at the screen. There came no reply. Hitting the keys harder, I typed why? Over and over, but the pattern remained silent. Tears streamed down my face. I attempted to comprehend the gravity of the pattern's words. Screwing my eyes shut, I bared my teeth, clenched my fists and made a guttural sound. In a flash of rage, I punched the screen. All the preparations were made. At 8:47 p.m. my son would be picking me up from Vancouver Airport. Packed luggage waited in the trunk of my car. It was nearly time to leave work and catch my plane. And even though I'd booked the cab and packed, the pattern didn't give me any trouble. I still retained full control, and this caused a hopeful bubble of excitement to rise in me. Maybe it felt bad for me and changed its mind, I thought. After all, if it knows if I'm happy, I'll obey the pattern. I'll do anything it wants when I get back. Arriving at the airport I checked my bag, claimed my ticket and sat near my gate. Nothing's happening. I watched the airport staff get ready to board passengers. Suddenly they called my section. I approached the entryway. A film of moisture formed on my hands and they trembled so badly I dropped my ticket. Smiling, with an open hand held towards me, a stewardess picked it up and greeted me. She scanned my ticket and handed it back to me. I think I thanked her but can't be sure, my mind was a wreck. Let me go, please let me go, I thought as I walked down the ramp, a thud of passengers following behind. The door to the plane was in sight. An airline host smiled as he saw me coming. My heart jackhammered, my mouth twitched. He grabbed my ticket and inspected it. I could have puked just down on your left, he said with a guiding gesture. I nodded. Actually, I said, I changed my mind. The host threw me a confused look. For a moment, I didn't grasp what happened. I said something, but it wasn't. My body turned around. No. I screamed, but no words came, only a faint mumble. My legs began to step off the plane but stopped midway. Exerting full mental power, I fought it. Somehow I gained control over my eyes, and when I slid them to the side I saw the edge of the door. My hands grasped it. Impatient passengers shoved past me and boarded. My body froze, immobilized by the tug of war in my mind. I refused to obey. I'm going to see my son. I'm getting on this plane. Let go of me. let go right now. But there was no relenting. As I stood contorted, hugging the side of the airplane door, staff began to ask if I was okay, but only garbled words and low moans emanated from my mouth. Eyes pushed out, muscles shot, it felt like being ripped in two. The airplane staff called security. I wanted someone, anyone, to rescue me. Help! I uttered weakly. Tears squeezed from the corners of my eyes when I thought about Ben, because I knew I couldn't fight any longer. The pattern was too strong. Exasperated, I let go. That was a year ago. Yesterday, the hell I've been in finally ended. When I woke up, I involuntarily rolled on my side, then did a double take of the room. Watching my fingers as if they were aliens, curling into a fist by my own will, I cried. Hugging myself into a ball under the blankets, I ran my hands over my arms, legs and chest, sobbing and writhing. Shakily, I swung my legs off the bed and touched the floor. On the first step I fell hard. From a pile of limbs I unfolded myself and, with a hand running against the wall, walked up and down the halls of my house, reorienting myself in reality. Having regained my balance, I rushed out to the front yard. Arrested by a brush of wind on my skin, I closed my eyes and felt the sensation of pure freedom. My face couldn't decide whether to smile or wince. Jolts of laughter burst from me. On my knees, I ran my hands through blades of grass and shut my eyes, gradually extending my body out. Clenching patches of grass, bent over, I lowered my head and spoke. I will obey the pattern, I said, and repeated these words through broken sobbing until the tears would come no longer. A woman jogged by. As much as I craved physical contact, I managed to restrain myself from running up and hugging her. Day in, day out for a year, viewing my life play before me in all its boring tedium, unable to speak, to move, to feel. The fact I maintained some semblance of a sane working mind is a minor miracle in itself. During my incarceration, the dull monotony suffocated my intellect. I felt dumb. Every inch 3 in my head got crammed with stale thoughts. God, it's embarrassing to realize you spend every day sitting and staring at a screen like an inanimate corpse. And on top of all that, the pattern didn't see or contact Ben, not once. An image of him standing at the airport, waiting for me to emerge from the plane, never left my thoughts. He'll probably never speak to me again. I'll probably never see him again. The pattern won't allow it. Now I have nothing. This morning, back inside the bunker, I sat at my desk stewing over everything that happened and contemplated the rest of my life. A dangerous idea took hold in my mind. I called Allison into my office. She greeted me as I shut the door behind her and asked if she would sit down. I took a seat behind my desk and looked her in the eyes with an intense seriousness. If I told you something about me, something very strange, will you promise not to judge me? Silence prevailed for a long moment and her face transformed from welcoming to expressionless and neutral. I decided to keep talking. Something is happening to me that I can't explain. Something that might kill me just for telling you this. A wave of nausea hit. For the past year my body has been possessed. Something that calls itself the pattern took control of me and used my body for its own purposes. Why is the pattern letting me tell her this? I searched Allison's face for understanding, but there was none. She continued to look through me as if staring at the wall behind me. I feel like, very soon, I'm going to lose my mind. Before that happens I wanted to tell someone, anyone. You don't have to believe me. It doesn't matter, I'll be punished for this, probably for the rest of my life. But at least you know. At least someone knows. Still, Allison remained expressionless. Do you believe me? Haven't you noticed something off about me during the past year? More silence please, say something. A shiver went up my spine and shook my whole body. Allison got up from her chair, turned and walked to the door. I got up. Do you believe me? Don't you have anything to say? Opening the door, Allison, with her head turned toward me, looked at me and said in a low voice, obey the pattern. She shut the door behind her. Story 4, Welcome to the circus. The window was open just enough to let in the cool night air. With it, came the distant smell of popcorn and cotton candy, a sickly sweet concoction that I had grown used to. The far-off giggles and excited screams of children blended with the ever-growing whimpers of Sheridan Conrad. I hadn't seen her for some time and had almost forgotten how annoyingly high-pitched her voice was. "Please," she whined, making the hairs in my ears shrivel, "Abby, please. I'm sorry." She's sorry, I thought to myself, giggling as I unraveled my contorted body. Well, one thing's for sure, she's going to be. I've always been flexible. Granted, every child has some sort of elasticity to their bodies in order for them to grow, but I was different. I could bend, move, and twist in ways that other people called abnormal. On playdates, you could find me with my toe shoved into my ear and my laughing voice talking into the heel of my foot, using it as a makeshift telephone when there were no other toys to play with. On the playground at recess, you could see me practically fold my body in half in order to find the perfect hiding spot between the slide and the playhouse. It wasn't until the school talent show that my gift turned into a curse. I thought it was cool, that I could so easily move my body in ways that others couldn't, that I could replicate the rhythm of the ocean through the flesh of my skin, waving and flipping as wild as the sea. Apparently, I was the only one that thought this way. And that word came back, abnormal. Abnormal Abby. I was pushed, locked in bathroom stalls, spit on, the works. Children can be cruel when they are faced with something they don't understand, but it's even worse when they hear it coming from their parents. The parents complained that I was craving attention, that I was distracting and a nuisance. I wasn't trying to do anything, it's just how I was. I felt more comfortable walking on my hands instead of my feet. I felt more comfortable sitting in the splits that I did crisscross applesauce. My parents thought it would be best to put me in gymnastics, let my acrobatics fly where floors turned to mats and chalk stained each blistered hand. But it wasn't right. There were rules and scores and competitions that needed to be won. I didn't want to win, I wanted to perform. The older I got, the more I begged my parents to take me out of school, to let me move away and perform on the streets. Of course, they said no. So, abnormal Abby stayed in school, getting poked and pushed and belted and punched. Until a breeze rolled in, and with it came freshly made popcorn and finely spun cotton candy. I had never been to the circus before, but as I walked through the arched entrance lined with balloons, it felt like I was returning home. The sounds of children laughing and ringing arcade buzzers engulfed my ears. Flashing lights and velvet curtains lined each new attraction I passed. The smell of hot, sticky food mixed with trampled grass seemed to mask every other sense in my body, but there was something else. Something that kept me listening, something lying deep beneath the fun. The heart of the beast. The roaring engines of each pop-up coaster and the squeak of day-old popcorn carts rolling gently by rumbled underneath the noise. The smell of sweat and grease paint was stifled from the everyday circus-goer, but not me. I heard it all, smelled every smell, and relished in the fact that I was home. I opened my eyes to see a man standing in front of me, looking like he just stepped out of an old newspaper funny ad. His black and white painted face was decorated with diamonds, almost seeming to clash with his striped shirt, but I didn't mind. His red lips broke out into a smile when my eyes focused on his. He held up his hand, telling me to wait, as he fished around in his back pocket and quickly pulled out his closed fist, presenting to me a hidden gift. He flicked his eyebrow up and let out a soundless chuckle as I watched. The mime opened his hand and his eyes traced around the invisible flight path of the imaginary bee. His eyes flicked this way and that, head lolling back and forth as the imaginary bee flew all around my body. I giggled and let my imagination run, hearing the faint buzz of wings flutter from one ear to the other. The mime snatched the bee between his fingers and took out an imaginary string from the breast pocket of his shirt. Quickly, he tied the string around the bee and handed me the other end. I smiled and gladly took my new pet, making my body jerk this way and that, as if the bee were tugging me along with it. The mime laughed a silent laugh, resting his hand over his belly with his mouth wide open. "Of course, you would be here, Nancy scoffed, making me tear my eyes away from my new friend. Freaks of a feather flocked together. Her and her gaggle of girls all squawked in laughter, pointing at me and the mime. Nancy, Carson, Bethany, Kate, and way in the back was the high-pitched cackle of Sheridan. I lowered my eyes and gently released the fake string of my new pet. I could hear the faint buzz of the imaginary bee fade away as it flew off into the setting sun, its little string leash disintegrating into the wind. I was back to reality. Back to abnormal Abby. As the girls turned to walk away, the mime's face gently seeped back into my vision, his crouching knees folding up under him as he sank eye level with me. He gently lifted my head and I saw the sadness in my heart mirrored on his face. But, once again, there was something hidden. Something deeply buried behind his eyes, something that would have scared me if I knew what its name was. Something that I would grow to realize was hate. Not of me, but for me. He snapped upright and grabbed my shoulders, guiding me through the crowds of sticky, screaming children and their yelling parents. I didn't even have time to ask what was happening or to tell him to let me go. I just let the mime steer me through the sea of people. Flashes of faces whizzed past my eyes, some glowing red from arcade games, others bright white from the flashing roller coaster bulbs. My arms brushed up against stuffed animals as the vendors took them down from their hooks, handing the prizes over to the jumping children. Each vendor we passed gave a knowing nod to the mime behind me, their blank faces turning toward me for no more than a second before turning back to their customers with smiles. We walked toward a darkened corner behind a row of garbage cans and, without a second glance, he whisked me away behind one of the velvet curtains. The thick fabric muffled the noise outside, leaving only a gentle hum to settle into my ears. This place was no attraction, it wasn't the fun house, or the house of horrors, or the elephant ear stand. It was the break room. A striped tent lined with dimmed yellow lights was played before me, and within it were the workers of the carnival. The off-duty clowns smoking their cigarettes, the suited performers with their mascot heads lying in their laps, and finally I saw him, the ringmaster. As if he knew I was there, the ringmaster quickly spun around on the balls of his feet, flicking his coattails and grabbing the edges of his jacket around his chest. His spidery legs carried him over in a matter of 3 steps, his face thrown into shadows as he glanced down at me. Well, what have we here? His silky voice slithered. A new friend? Or a wandering eye? I felt the mime's hands gently dig into my shoulders as he pulled me back into his chest, growing oddly protective of me. The ringmaster smiled and rhythmically tapped his fingers against his jacket. Friend, I see, he smirked, folding himself over to look me in the face. And do we have a name, new friend? I swallowed the lump in my throat and croaked out a shaky, Abby. The ringmaster tried the name out for himself, Abby. His eyes flicked past my shoulder and up at the mime, seeming to ask him a silent question only the black and white dressed man could answer. With a gentle smirk, the ringmaster turned back to me, and do we have a nickname, Miss Abby? I felt my head instinctively drop, shielding my eyes from any onlookers that might have been watching. A gloved hand gently lifted my chin and patted my cheek, the thick cotton making a dull thud noise inside my head. The ringmaster tutted, wagging his finger at me with a smile. There is no room for shame in the circus. I laughed a bit and cleared my throat, having to speak the words that had hurt me since elementary school, abnormal Abby. There was a lull in the tent as the focus turned toward me. A static seemed to spark about the room, fizzing and hissing against the spotlights and dancing around the hairs on my arms. I thought I had offended them, said something wrong, stepped out of line. The workers all stared, the whites of their eyes glowing at me from the shadowed corners like the reddened ash of their cigarettes. My head snapped to the ringmaster in front of me. The longer I stared into the pits of his eyes, the more sweat began to pool at my hairline, threatening to drip down my face. I shuffled backward, pushing further into the mime, silently hoping to melt through him and out the tent. I was about to run away when the ringmaster broke out into a laugh. Oh, is that all? He bellowed, grabbing back onto his coat. Dear, we've been called much worse than abnormal. Why, that's a wonderful name. I felt my brows furrow, partially out of confusion, but mostly out of anger. How dare he say that name was wonderful? Try having it written on a piece of paper and taped to your back for an entire day without you knowing it. And having to walk around third grade thinking people were laughing at you just because. Or try having it spray painted on your locker, and every time you washed it off to have it magically reappear the next day. Or get onto the bus and sit in the same seat closest to the door, only to find that name jaggedly carved into the fabric, forever labeling that seat as your spot. I didn't find it wonderful, and I sure as hell didn't need some freak in a red jacket laughing at me about it. As if out of nowhere, he stopped laughing. His head cocked to the side as he studied my face, seeming to read my thoughts as if I were speaking them aloud. The same slick grin crept over his lips as he tapped his fingers along his jacket again, rocking up and down on his heels. "My dear, why would you want to be normal?" he asked. It was now my turn to watch his face squish in confusion. "Who wants to be average, Abby? About as good as everyone else, Abby? That's no fun." He smiled, throwing his arms out to the side. "Take a look around. No one here is normal." I let my eyes wander over the tent, landing on performer after performer. At first glance, they seemed normal to me, but the ringmaster's words lifted a veil that had been over my eyes. Now, I could see the tent for what it really was. Abnormal. A hulking man quietly sat in a chair, threatening to break its legs just from his pure weight alone. The bearded lady gently brushed through her chocolate locks, both on her head and on her face. A fire eater prepared his flaming sword in the corner, making sure to stretch his neck and clear his throat. And finally, I turned around and looked up at the mime still protectively holding onto my shoulders. The white face painted something I hadn't even noticed before: thick, raised, bumpy skin. Either scars or burns, I couldn't tell, but I didn't care. He gave me a smile that I couldn't help being infected by. I nodded my head and turned back around to the ringmaster, holding out my hand high. I chirped, "I'm abnormal, Abby." The ringmaster's cotton-gloved hand enveloped mine in a firm, reassuring grasp. His lips cracked open, revealing pearly white teeth against his tan skin. "Welcome to the circus." And that was it. I was home. That night, I begged my parents to let me stay, to let me join the circus and learn the ways of performing. I tried explaining to them the feeling I got. A feeling that ignited my soul and filled it with purpose, passion, and meaning. My parents either chose to ignore me or genuinely didn't care. Either way, I still ranted. And, either way, they still refused. They told me it would be a disgrace if I were to become a carny. They acted as if being a carny was a bad thing, as if it were the same as being a murderer. But no, that would come much later. I begged them, practically threw myself onto my knees and cried, "Let me go. I belong there. I need them." "What you need is an education and a productive outlet to subside your erratic behavior," my mom quipped, removing her glasses from the bridge of her nose, making sure to not mess her perfectly placed hair. "What would we tell the family if you left? Tell them the truth. Tell them I went to boarding school. Tell them I died." I screamed, fat tears rolling down my cheeks. "I don't care, just let me go." I shoved past my parents and ran out the door, ignoring my father's orders to come back. Barefoot and in my pajamas, I sprinted down the street to where the circus was set up. I felt the tears stream down my cheeks as the wind blew off my skin, turning them into rain over the pavement. The blacktop changed to stones and then to grass. My feet touched the trodden lawn and I slipped to a halt against the mud. In place of where the carnival had been, was a skeleton. Forgotten screws and poles sat stuck in the earth, unbound ropes gently catching the late-night breeze. Littered wrappers rolled across my toes and got caught up in whatever brush was left alive. They had left. Without me. Betrayal was a feeling I never thought I would get to experience. I never cared enough about anything for it to betray me. My feet sunk deeper into the muddy blades of grass the longer I stood there, stuck between the imposter of a house behind me and the skeleton of a home in front of me. But, through the forgotten rubble of the circus, there was one sliver of hope waiting for me to grab it. A balloon in the shape of a bumblebee gently bobbed in the center of the mud-ridden field. The end of the string was tied around a rock and I lightly peeled the note from under the stone. Written in the most beautiful cursive were the words, "All in good time. The circus always comes back to town." I smiled and held the note to my chest, trying to breathe in the last bit of home before it got swept away in the wind. I would wait. Days turned to months and months turned to years, and still the circus had not come back. I was 17 when I almost gave up, deciding that I had missed my chance at the one thing that would have made me happy in life. I was about to go to bed when I heard it, a faint whistle coming from my window. The slightest crack at the bottom allowed wisps of air to creep into my room, beckoning me to come over. I tore open the blinds and threw open the window, instantly smiling as my hair got swept up in the breeze. Popcorn and cotton candy. Through the thicket of trees surrounding my neighborhood, I saw faint, flashing lights. Reds, yellows, and oranges danced through the leaves and paraded among the starry night sky. They were calling me home. I kicked my leg up onto my sill and slid out the window, dropping onto the freshly manicured front lawn. The blades of chilled grass tickled my feet as I scuttled toward the pavement. My feet slapped against the blacktop as I sprinted toward the lights, a sense of déjà vu washing over me as I repeated the same path I had ran years earlier. The closer I got, the more I realized the full circus wasn't back, just the fun house. I laughed, my voice dancing in the wind as I left it behind. The laughing clown entrance swallowed me whole as I bolted through the black curtains. A black light glowed around the room, tinting the maze of mirrors an almost blinding shade of blue. I wandered around for a bit, bumping into a sharp mirror edge every so often. My reflection was spat back at me everywhere I looked and soon I couldn't even remember where the entrance was. I tried retracing my steps, but I kept bumping into myself. I just kept seeing me, my dark blonde hair that was getting scraggly the longer I let it grow, my ragged sleeping shorts and hole-ridden shirt mocking my every turn. Was this a joke? Was this just another message left for me to find? My heart fluttered, and I gave a shriek of joy as they started appearing one by one inside the mirrors. The bearded lady, the strong man, clowns of all different colors, and finally my mime. He smiled and waved, making me bump into his reflection. He was somewhere in there, I just didn't know where. I went to turn around and call for him, but I bumped into something else. Something much warmer. The ringmaster stood before me and smiled, hands tapping against his chest. He leaned down a bit, stretching so we were face to face. So, he breathed, looking around at the mirrors before smiling back at me. "Are you ready?" That's how I joined the circus. Abnormal Abby could finally live in peace. My parents came looking for me, of course. The very next day, I heard their frantic voices over a police car megaphone just outside the fun house. I had spent the entire night there talking to my new friends. Before any of us could move, the ringmaster flung open the black velvet curtains to the funhouse entrance and stepped out into the early morning sun. Red and blue flashing lights assaulted my eyes for a brief moment, but then the curtains swung shut again. "Welcome, one and all," the ringmaster bellowed, his voice only slightly muffled. "I'm sorry to say, our attraction is closed for the day. We had a special one-night performance, I'm afraid you missed it. Where's our daughter?" I heard my mother shriek. "Where's our Abby?" There was a pause before the ringmaster spoke. "Who? You know damn well who." My father barked. "You're all she ever talked about." "That's very flattering." The ringmaster's voice gave way to a chuckle, "but I have no idea who you're talking about." "Sir," another voice, presumably a police officer, spoke up, "we'd like to check your establishment, if that's all right with you." My breath caught in my throat and my knees almost buckled. They were going to find me. They were going to take me away and never let me come back. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. A firm hand on my shoulder made me jump and I turned around to see the mime hold a finger to his lips. He tiptoed around the corner, dragging me behind him, and presented a pile of luggage cases. Without a word, I knew what he was saying. Together, we rummaged through the pile, trying to find something that wasn't already filled with clothes, bowling pins, extra swords, or tent poles. The mime held up an empty suitcase, the brown, slouchy leather wrinkling in his hands. I nodded my head and helped him unzip the ancient bag. I carefully put my feet in, folding my legs up into my chest and tucking my chin as far down as I could. I closed my eyes and heard the zipper crunch back into place, throwing me into a darkness deeper than my shut eyes could imagine. I was jostled around a bit, and my bag was stood up against something, either a wall or another bag. I could hear footsteps coming into the fun house, heeled shoes clacking against the false wood floor. I heard faint muttering and the ringmaster's silky voice, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Then I heard my parents, not their voices but their footsteps, my father's heavy footfalls and my mother's frantic scuffles. My hot breath rolled down my legs, steaming up the leather bag and turning my hiding spot into a sauna. Without a warning, my bag was thrown to the side and I had to bite my cheek to stop from letting out a yelp. The ringmaster's voice lazily danced around the room as he walked over toward my suitcase. "Easy on the merchandise," he laughed, and picked the bag up. The feeling of being weightless sent a shiver down my spine. "Mom, she's not here," the officer spoke, his shoes leading back out the curtained door. "Let's keep looking around the neighborhood." But my mom trailed off, her cracked voice pleading for an excuse to search further. "Mom," I thought, hugging my legs tighter. I hadn't thought about my actions until that moment. I didn't say goodbye, I didn't even leave a note. I just slipped out at night and was gone in the morning. Their only daughter. Their shambling feet almost made me call out to them, almost. I still loved my parents, but they didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. My suitcase was gently set down and a lull fell over the tent. I could hear car doors slam shut from outside, the roar of engines coming to life, and the gentle pop of stones being crunched under rolling tires. I counted in my head 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi before I heard the slow whine of the zipper. The suitcase lid fell open and I popped out like a spring-form toy. Surrounded by the smiling faces of the circus workers, I tentatively smiled back and fixed my hair. "Abnormal Abby," the ringmaster bellowed, "I think we found your act." And so, the real Abnormal Abby was born. My mime would walk out on stage with a suitcase and a pocket full of tricks. He would perform his act, making the crowds laugh and cheer, before turning toward his magic suitcase. With a silent clap of his hands, and a hidden tap of his foot against the suitcase lid, the magic bag would slowly start to unzip by itself, and out popped Abnormal Abby. With a face full of white paint, rosy cheeks, and a black bob wig, I would bend and flip, turning the human body into shapes previously thought unimaginable, stunning the crowd into silence. Finally, no more laughter. The feeling of their eyes watching my every move with such intent gave me a sense of pride I had never felt before. They had paid to see me, they endured hours of standing in line and sitting in back-aching folding chairs just to watch me do the things I had been doing since childhood. Sure, sometimes the mime's act carried on a bit long and I was stuck waiting in the suitcase for an extra half hour, the heat from the stage lights warming my insides and making me sweat. But I wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world. I finally found the place I fit in. I thought things couldn't get any better, but I was quickly proven wrong. They started going missing, one after the other. The first one to go was Nancy. The police reports circled all around my old neighborhood and even made it to the news. Then Carson went missing. Then Bethany. I didn't catch on to what was happening until Kate went missing a month later. I had thought our house of horror mannequins were looking better than usual, their mutilated forms seeming more realistic than before. Their tangled hair, thick with blood and other matter, covered their drooping faces, shielding the mutilated skin from onlookers. The added stench of copper made the crowds wonder if the blood was real or fake. But as long as the crowds were only wondering and not suspecting, we were going to be okay. There was only one more on our list and, the way things were going, this would be the easiest one. I had decided long before that for this performance, I wouldn't wear my makeup. Her house was nestled in the corner of the block, shaded by trees with a big enough yard to swallow up any noise that might be made. We watched her parents drive away, an obvious date night they had planned for months. We waited for the cover of night to stalk our way forward. I stayed in my place, not making a peep. My eager hands shook against my knees as I tried calming my heart, but I couldn't help it. This was almost as good as being on stage. I heard the ringmaster knock on her door 3 times, and shortly after I heard the heavy wooden entrance open. "What?" Sheridan asked. "Good evening, madam." The ringmaster greeted. "Today is your lucky day. You've won the raffle for a free show." "I didn't enter any contest," Sheridan drawled. I could hear her obnoxious gum chewing from inside the suitcase. "Oh," the ringmaster feigned confusion. "I'm sorry. Would you mind helping me then?" Their voices faded away as the mime carried me off, making a fake trail back to our car. His footfalls changed from clacking on the pavement to soft shuffling in the grass. We had stalked the house long enough to know her window was always left open. I felt the suitcase get lifted up and over the sill, the change in temperature seeping in through the material. I was gently set down and heard the others hide. I waited, trying not to shake in excitement as I heard the front door slam shut. Her lazy footsteps got louder and louder as she thumped her way back to the bedroom. I saw slivers of orange light come through the teeth of the zipper as she flipped her lamp on, stopping when her eyes unmistakably fell onto my suitcase. "What the?" The lights flipped off again and the door slammed shut, her cry of surprise overpowering the faint click of the door lock. "Who are you?" she screamed. "What do you want?" Her voice was cut off, muffled by a gloved hand. I waited a couple of seconds before slowly unzipping the suitcase. An agonizingly low rumble emitted from the teeth as they popped out of place, allowing the slightest bit of moonlight to peek in. I heard her heavy breath as I creaked open the lid. A clown tossed her to the ground, her knees landing on the hardwood with a thump. Our eyes briefly met through the crack of the suitcase and I slowly inched myself out. The window was open just enough to let in the cool night air. With it, came the distant smell of popcorn and cotton candy, a sickly sweet concoction that I had grown used to. The far-off giggles and excited screams of children blended with the ever-growing whimpers of Sheridan Conrad. I hadn't seen her for some time and I had almost forgotten how annoyingly high-pitched her voice was until she started talking. "Please," she whined, making the hairs in my ears shrivel. "Abby, please." "I'm sorry." "She's sorry," I thought to myself, giggling as I unraveled my contorted body. "Well, one thing's for sure, she's going to be." I stepped fully out of my suitcase and shook out my limbs, stretching my neck and flexing my fingers around the glinting weapon in my hand. From the shadows, my friends stepped forward, the other freaks she had most definitely made fun of before. One by one, they started humming the ever-popular circus song Entry of the Gladiators. I couldn't help the little pep in my step as I walked forward toward Sheridan. She was the last one, then we could move on. I bent at my waist, hovering over her tear-streaked face as I smiled, just like the ringmaster had taught me. Her big doe eyes looked up at me, filled with false innocence and remorse. "Please," she whimpered, strings of spittle globing at her lips. I smiled wider, studying the blade before turning my eyes back toward her. "Welcome to the circus," I greeted, licking my teeth. I couldn't help but join in humming with my friends, relishing in the song that had infected my soul. Abnormal Abby had the last laugh. Story 5, Jealousy. I can make the dust blow across the room, at the most I can make the curtains blow like there's a draft. In times of extreme rage and frustration when all I feel is hate, I might be able to knock a glass off the worktop, throw a pen on the floor or make someone feel my presence. But that's all. I swoop around this house in a blind rage, spinning from room to room so full of anger I cannot contain myself. I scream but no one hears it. I try to punch the walls, smash the windows and kick your fucking telly across the room. But no. I can't do that. This is hell. There's no fire and brimstone, no tormentors, no torture. Just this. I'm fucking stuck here serving longer than any prisoner in jail. I storm around the rooms but I can never leave these four walls. I beat my chest, punch my own head, even smack myself in my balls. I feel nothing. I rage and I rage and I rage. Look at your partner that you love dearly. If you don't have one, You don't know how lucky you are. Because to have loved insanely, then still feel all that love, but not be able to touch them, not be able to kiss them or hold their hand, not be able to talk to them but watch them, whenever they are home, watch them go about their lives. Sure, she cried for a few weeks. I lay beside her on the bed and put my non-physical arm around her. I wanted so badly to comfort her as she stared at the framed picture of me. I watched her cry and I could do. It cut me like a knife through my very heart. I could feel everything, but could do nothing. In those early days I cried, I wailed and I screamed in frustration. Then after a few months things changed. You brought him home. This muscular man who is better looking than I ever was. Who works out. Who dresses better. And suddenly you weren't sad anymore. But I always was. I floated into other rooms. The torture of watching you eat together tore me apart inside with sheer jealousy and rage. I tried to jam my fingers into my ears when I could hear you fucking. I would smash round the house in pure spite, screaming and spitting venomous words. Cursing you fucking bitch. How easily you moved on. How I'm trapped here. Locked in this hell. Listening to you screwing him every single night. In the mornings and whenever you could. I hate you. I feel unobtainable fury coursing through me like electricity. I focus all of my strength and I feel this shooting outwards towards a coffee cup on the little round table beside the couch where you and him are sat. It falls off and smashes and you both jump. Looking at each other you sense me. You feel my hate as I look up at the light bulb and again focus all of my might at making it flicker. I sense your fear. Him too. The big fucking pussy. All the muscle in the world will not stop me when I reach my true potential. I'm growing stronger now. I'm flexing. I hate you. And if I have to listen to you to going for another round, I'll smash every fucking thing in the kitchen until you stop. I try to focus. I try to remember. We were high school sweethearts. Together since 16. We grew up together, me the geeky guy who was happiest when doing my best to make you smile. I'd bring you flowers and buy you jewelry when I'd saved up the money from my business as a self-employed joiner. I lived for you. Beautiful you. Petite and pretty with dark hair. When I proposed to you in Paris and you said yes, I swear my soul soared 1,000,000 miles into the air. The happiest day of my life. Then one day as I cooked you dinner I'd felt this sharp pain right through my head like someone stabbed a screwdriver through my skull and attached it to the mains electricity. I collapsed to the floor with my limbs jerking uncontrollably. Then I woke up. And I tried talking to you. But you couldn't hear me. I tried to get your attention but you couldn't see me. I tried to touch you but you couldn't hear me. I loved you so much. But now all you do is torture me with this other man. Like I never existed. How easily you forgot. How easily you moved on. How quickly you put all of my things in cardboard boxes and packed me away. I never sleep, I never eat. I do nothing but watch. And the more I watch, the more this black hole in my chest envelopes me. Swallows me deeper into a lot of despair. The good memories drift further away. And I grow stronger. All I want is to make you feel as unhappy as I do. I'll drive him away. I'll drive him insane. I sit down in the same room as you both. And stare directly at you. Eyes full of disdain. Story 6, I don't know how this is gonna end, but I'm fucking scared. So the only reason I'm sharing my story is because this is a throwaway account. I have changed the names of everybody involved because I'm too chicken shit to have anybody in the real world know. But I can't hold it in anymore, I just can't. I know every detail may not be interesting to you, but I have to share every mundane detail to do this story any justice. I don't know why they are doing this, I don't know what they are doing to allow them to get away with it, but whatever it is I'm fucking terrified of it. To give you a bit of a background check, I was born and raised in Canada but moved to the USA when I met my husband online. Where else nowadays? While we were dating I was in college but dropped out, and so far in our relationship he's the only one with a formal education and essentially makes all the money. I do however find myself content with my lower paying job as a pharmacy technician. It gives me a chance to learn about medicine, which I always found interesting, as well as meet and form relationships with our patients. My pharmacy isn't part of some massive chain and I do live in a relatively small town, so it's easy to form some kind of relationship with anybody who comes in. Which leads me to my next point. I met Mr. and Mrs. Duchesne, let's call them that, pretty soon after I started working as a tech. They were your typical cute, elderly couple. I used to be able to tell it was them walking in the pharmacy by Mrs. Duchesne's loud banter followed by the clacking sound of her husband's cane. I always liked to make myself available to help them once they got to the pickup window, because I genuinely enjoyed their company. I noticed you had another appointment with your dermatologist, Hattie. How is everything looking? I would ask. Mrs. Duchesne had skin cancer. Normally with any other patient with cancer I never liked to ask because it could be a painful subject, but Mrs. Duchesne was different, she was like a grandmother to me. Hattie sighed. Well, not any worse, but not any better, I'm afraid. She replied while pulling at her sleeves. That was one of Hattie's signature moves. She was diagnosed with skin cancer not long after her daughter's passing and since then has taken every precaution to make sure it doesn't get worse. I mean, this woman had every inch of skin covered whenever she went out, and if it was too bright, or too warm, she just wouldn't leave the house. I would jokingly tell her that if things get a little too warm she shouldn't worry, it's not like her skin would slip off. She never found it funny, so I stopped telling jokes. I packed their prescriptions in a little paper bag and handed it to Mr. Duchesne, whose hand was trembling while reaching for it. I smiled at them both. I would count it not getting any worse as good news, Hattie. I mentioned as I rang the prescription at the cash register. She thanked me, and I watched them slowly walk away. I felt so bad for them. Their daughter Edith was the only family they had in this world left. From what co-workers told me, Edith was what one would call a spinster. She was never married and she always lived with her parents, even though she was a plastic surgeon and literally made shitloads of money. Hattie told me that while Edie, what they called her, was in her office, she suffered an aneurysm and was found dead with her face in a book. She wasn't even 40. My boss told me that she had wanted to send something to the funeral but they never had one. I guess from what I heard Edie was Mr. Duchesne's world and he hasn't really said much since she died. I had only known the Duchesnes for maybe like 3 to 4 months when they asked me. They had come in to pick up prescriptions as normal. When I noticed that the both of them looked upset, growing worried, I asked what was wrong. Just another caretaker gone. She hasn't showed up in 3 days and isn't answering her telephone. Mr. Duchesne chimed. Who the fuck would ghost old people? Like for real. The couple shared a quick glance with each other, then both looked back at me. You know, you are the only reason we have stayed at this pharmacy. You're so caring towards us and we look forward to seeing you. I have something I'd like to ask you, Hattie started. I was so touched that they thought so highly of me even though our interactions were always the same and always just business. I nodded at her to go on. Vern and I are finding it harder to do things around the house, and even harder to trust anybody to do it for us. Is there any way you might find time in your busy schedule to help us out? We'd compensate you well for your time. To be completely honest, I wanted to say no. I have zero experience in home care and honestly, I work full-time and want all the free time I have to do whatever I want to do. But I just stared at them. Oh Hattie, I really don't know. I'm not a PSW or anything. I started my line of excuses. She reassured me that they were both still able to take care of themselves, just needed help with cleaning and small chores. I thought about it for a minute, then with my face flush with the pressure of them awaiting an answer and not wanting to disappoint, I agreed to help them out around my schedule a couple times a week. That night I went out for drinks with my best friends / co-workers and asked them if what I was doing was even allowed or if I could lose my job. Part of me was hoping they'd say I could. If you don't want to do it, you should have said no, they both implied. I told them how I just couldn't say no. I didn't want to disappoint them or be another letdown in their lives. At least it was extra money. When I got home I got the same response from my husband. I guess they just didn't understand where I was coming from. When I went there for the first time I was nervous, I don't even know why. Their house was decorated just as it stereotypically would be. Wood paneling, horrendous carpeting and so on. What was different though was that their walls were dedicated to their daughter. A large print of her med school graduation photo was in the middle of the wall in their living room. I studied the picture for a while, then looked at the Duchesnes to look for family resemblance. Edith had the same bone structure in her face as her mother does, and though she had brown eyes like both her parents, hers had a striking resemblance to Hattie's. I get sick thinking of those eyes now. For the first while everything was fine and dandy. Not much work was needed from me, most of my shifts there just involved sitting and chatting with them while enjoying various different cookies. As the weather got warmer though, things around their house changed. Now it's the middle of July. I worked in the afternoon and was going to go to the Duchesnes to do some small chores like putting the garbage bins back since trash was collected, check the mail etc. I went inside first just like I always did to let them know I was there, and the first thing I did was shudder. The place was freezing. It was 86°F outside, so yes it was hot as fuck, but when I went to turn the air conditioning down I saw what she had it set to. Fucking 30°F, for Canadians and literally everybody else that's -1°C. Unable to stand the cold I ran to the living room and grabbed a blanket off the chair. Vern was sleeping on the couch under about 6 heavy blankets. I assumed what happened was just that maybe Hattie, who would sometimes get scatterbrained at cause of her cancer meds, just kept forgetting she was turning the air up. I know it's not the greatest theory, but it's all that I had to try and rationalize from. I wrapped myself in the blanket and walked to their TV room where I could hear her rocking chair going back and forth. Hey Hattie, I feel like the house is getting pretty cold, so I think I'm going to turn it down a bit if this is where things start to get a bit strange. Before I say anything, please keep in mind that the Hattie I knew before this very moment was a 74-year-old sickly lady, who couldn't walk more than 10 steps without needing to rest. As soon as I said turn it down, this sickly woman jumped up from her chair, ran up to me and pinned me against the wall. I'm not kidding. At this point I'm disturbed. Mostly because I didn't realize this was something I would ever have to deal with. My immediate thought was that maybe she was getting some kind of dementia with violent tendencies. Again, I know it's not the best theory. I took a deep breath. She held her expression. Her eyes were so wide I feared they may pop out of her skull. Her grip, which was disturbingly tight, started to loosen. Please. Do not. She muttered between her teeth. As if somebody snapped their fingers was how quickly she changed. She gave me a loving smile and slowly hobbled back to the rocking chair. I smiled nervously and began to walk backwards out of the room. This is where I'm going to end for now. Things from this point onwards just get really weird and really scary for me. I'm choosing to write about this now because I just really don't know the safest way to go about dealing with these fucking people. Just know that what I share with you is 100% true. I love to read these stories on Reddit and creepypasta and be terrified, but some monsters are real. Also, I hope I'm writing this in a way that it can make sense. I'm not exactly a gifted writer. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. God save us all. Story 7, Pop-up ads aren't as innocent as they seem. We've all seen them before, pop-up ads. They're highly annoying, and with the exception of giving your device a possible virus, are pretty innocent. I can tell you now there is a much better reason than a computer virus to avoid them at all costs. As a college student, I am under a lot of stress. Rent is expensive, classes are hard, and finding a good job is much harder than it seems. That's why when I saw the little pop-up ad that promised to make all my problems disappear, I clicked it. Normally I don't do those kinds of things, but on that particular day, everything had piled up and I didn't think I could take much more stress. At first glance, it seemed to be some sort of online counseling thing. Harmless, right? So I signed up. The information that the ad wanted me to fill out seemed normal enough, with the exception of a few questions. Off the top of my head, the weirdest ones included: why do you want us to take your issues away? Please give valid reasoning, as this is a serious and permanent solution. addresses and or names of current problems, and a few more that I can't remember. Point being, they were odd, but could be brushed off as some sort of weird program that needed some personal info to be able to help. After I was all signed up, I went to bed. The ad hadn't really given me any information on what would happen or when it would, so all I could do was hope for the best. The next morning when I woke up, it was Saturday, and that meant rent day. I remember feeling depressed as I knew I wouldn't have enough money again, which would get me in trouble with my landlord. She was an odd, grumpy woman, and had a time set for everything. That included rent. She always stopped by at 9 a.m. sharp, never a moment later. That's why when the knock never came, I began to get concerned. Sure, I didn't have enough money, and sure she could really cause me some issues, but she was still a person who probably had a family to support. I decided to go to her office and check in. If she wasn't there, then maybe I'd ask a neighbor if they'd seen her. I hauled myself down to her office and knocked loudly on the door. I waited for a few minutes, but when no one answered, I went to go ask anyone if they'd seen her. I decided to ask my downstairs neighbor. He was noisy and the root cause of many sleepless nights due to excessive fighting with his wife, but he was known in the building to know anything about anyone. You can probably imagine the shock I had when his sobbing wife answered the door. "Mary? What's wrong?" I asked her. She glared at me while she wiped her tears away. "My husband. He's missing." She choked through sobs. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, missing?" I asked her for clarification. "He disappeared. He went to bed early last night, complaining about a pounding headache, and this morning when I went to check on him, he was gone. The room looked like it had been ransacked, but the police couldn't find any DNA or any information about what happened." She cried. I felt bad for Mary, but if someone had really broken in, there wasn't much I could do for her. I glanced at her sympathetically. "I hope he turns up, Mary," I told her, and she scowled at me before slamming the door shut on me. I stood shocked for a moment before returning to my apartment to get ready for work. I work at a retail store in my local mall. It's not a good job, but I haven't had any real problems there so far. So, I wasn't exactly dreading going in at the time. When I finally got to work, it seemed like I made mistake after mistake. I was distracted by the absence of my cranky landlord and the disappearance of my neighbor, and therefore couldn't concentrate on anything I was supposed to be doing. Hell, I didn't even notice how bad I was messing up until my manager called me back. She sat me down with a disappointed sigh. "Marcy, what's gotten into you? You haven't done a single task correctly today. Keep this up and I'm going to have to fire you," she said. I felt a surge of anger and despair course through me. I was looking for another job, but until I could find one, I still had to survive off of the wages here. I apologized insincerely, and returned to my work. I noticed my manager watching me work very closely, which just added to my nervous/angry feelings. By the time lunch rolled around, I was a complete nervous wreck. Not only was I distracted, but I was also worried about losing my job. Not the best working conditions. After coming back from lunch, I found myself needing to call the manager over to assist a customer. Only, the thing is, no one had seen the manager in the past hour. It was like she just up and vanished. I started to freak out a bit. It seemed like anyone that had put any sort of pressure on my life was slowly vanishing. It started off like that, only people who had an impact on any sort of health of mine would disappear. But more recently, even just a dirty look from someone and they were gone. I don't know how to stop this. I'm starting to worry about all these disappearances being linked to me somehow, or not being able to put a stop to whatever that ad does. My worry is making me sick. I can't sleep at night. I'm losing weight. My thoughts have started causing serious problems for me. And that's what worries me most. Story 8, Lady Fingers. Let me tell you a story about my wife, Martha. We live in Maysville, a small town in Kentucky. She owns her own bakery in town, called the Sweet Tooth. She does well for herself. She pours her heart and soul into every pie, cake, and dessert she offers. This is where the story begins. You see, Martha was contacted by a baking show in Tennessee. They wanted to feature her bakery, and one of her most infamous dishes, her tiramisu. My sweet Martha was over the moon when she got the call. Of course, she would be honored to have her work featured on network television. I've never seen her so happy before in my life. Not even on our wedding day did she light up like fireworks on the 4th of July. This was a great opportunity for her bakery to get some more business, and for her to get her name out there. The day after she got the call, she set out to perfect her tiramisu for her big debut. She woke up early, and head out to the bakery to get working. She left a note for me to read when I left for work. Off to practice my lady fingers. Love you, hun, Martha. I chuckled when I read the note. She was known for her lady fingers in town. She made them from scratch, and boy were they delicious. Nobody knew how she got them so perfect. But they made her tiramisu absolutely delicious. Only Martha and I knew her secret to those lady fingers. I guess I should tell you a little about myself. I worked at the local funeral home. It's been in my family for generations, so naturally I took over when my father passed. Since I grew up around the job, I grew to love it. I feel at ease around death and mourners. Anyway, enough about me, let's get to Martha and that cooking show she got invited to be on. She was at the bakery early that morning, trying to make her tiramisu even better than it already was. She could be a bit obsessive over things sometimes. She wanted to make sure every bite was an explosion of flavor in the mouth, so the host wouldn't be disappointed. I was in the middle of an embalming when she called me, her voice frantic. Mark, honey. I ran out of my special ingredient for the lady fingers. I need some more now. I need to get it right before the show comes. I could hear the tears welling up in her eyes, her voice sounding all wobbled and high-pitched. Don't worry, honey, I said, using my voice to try to soothe hers. I'll bring everything around in a few minutes. Let me finish up with Mr. Sampson here and I'll be right over with what you need. Her breathing slowed down, and her voice got back to normal. Thanks, hon, you're the best. She hung up a happy woman. I finished up with Mr. Sampson and washed my hands, making my way to the special freezer. I took things out as I found the hiding spot for her special ingredient. We had to hide them. We don't want anyone to know what we really put in her lady fingers. It would spoil the surprise. Plus, someone might try to copy us. And we definitely wouldn't want that. Nobody is going to take business away from my sweetheart. Lady fingers for the lady fingers, I chucked as I grabbed the bag from the back of the shelf. Nobody ever noticed if their dead relative was missing a finger or two. We didn't use male fingers, no. Just lady fingers. It didn't matter how old or how young. A lady finger is a lady finger. And those ground up in the dough make the best tiramisu you'll ever eat. I rushed them over to the bakery, carefully hiding them in a lunchbox for Martha. She was so grateful that I brought them over. She couldn't wait for me to try this new batch she was making. It's the best yet, she said enthusiastically, wiping her hands on her apron and giving me a kiss before running to the back. Boy, was she right. I've never had tiramisu this delicious before. Every bite was a combination of different flavors that hugged my taste buds closely. Oh, Martha. I think you've done it, I said, my mouth full of her dessert. That host lady is going to love these. You'll get your name out there for sure. I wanted to eat 5 more pieces, but limited myself to just 1 more. I couldn't wait to see my Martha on TV, showing off her dessert that she's been making for 20 years. The day finally came. The TV crew set up in the bakery, many onlookers peeking through the window to see what was going on. This was a big day for Martha, and even our town. Nobody ever came here for anything, let alone a big TV crew interviewing Martha. We would be famous for sure. People would start coming from different states just to taste her tiramisu. She made her special batch for the host, and boy did she love it. The entire crew did, too. They couldn't get enough of it. Martha, the TV host asked, nodding to the camera. What is your secret? This tiramisu is to die for. Well, my sweet Martha said, smiling at the camera, careful not to let our secret out. The secret is in the lady fingers. Story 9, buried alive. For privacy reasons I cannot disclose me and my brother's names. My mom died a couple of months ago. She was in a coma beforehand because of a freak car accident. There was no point in keeping her in the coma because according to the doctors she would have passed away anyway. My brother and I were her only family. She didn't have any siblings and our father committed suicide when we were only 14. So the only people attending her funeral was us. It had only been 2 days since she was pronounced dead by the time we buried her. We didn't see the need for a funeral because it was only us two who would attend it. We ended up burying her under the red oak tree in our garden because she always wanted to be buried under it for some reason. My brother and I were twins and we had just turned 19 on the day of her death, which meant that we could legally live by ourselves in the house as long as we paid the taxes. So we kept the house and invited our friend Ian to live with us as roommates because his mom and dad wanted him to move out. We sorted this out soon after the doctors informed us that our mother would die. The morning after we buried our mom, Ian stated that he couldn't fall asleep last night because of a muffled screaming and groaning coming from the red oak tree in our garden. I told him it was probably a poor animal which got hurt or something. His reply still haunts me to this day. He replied it was human. Back then I didn't realize what it was, so I replied, don't worry about it, it was your mind playing tricks on you. The day after that was pretty normal. It was the weekend, so we just stayed in all day and played together with each other on the PS4. At 8 o'clock we went out to the bar and got drunk. We weren't even allowed to drink, but the death of our mom really made us need the drink. We called an Uber at around 12 o'clock to pick us up. We were dropped off at our house and for some reason, my brother and I decided to pass out on top of our mother's grave. Ian just went to his room upstairs. I swear I could hear a really muffled crying come from underneath us, but I was too drunk to care. My brother woke me up. Worried, I asked him what was wrong, but I couldn't concentrate on what he was replied with because I had a bad headache from the hangover. But by the look in his eyes, I could tell it wasn't good. I asked him to repeat what he had said. He said that he had a dream of mom in her coffin trying to get out her. That thought creeped me out. It didn't help that we were right on top of her grave under the red oak tree. He explained that her eyes were bloodshot and she was screaming and crying. He insisted that we should dig her up. I exclaimed that it would scar us because she is going to be rotting. He looked at me and said it was so real. As soon as he said that, he ran back into the house to wake up Ian. I went back inside and I was drinking some water when Ian and my brother came through the kitchen with a shovel. I asked them what were they going to do, and Ian enthusiastically said, we are going to dig up your mom. So my brother was so serious about his dream that he convinced Ian to dig up our mom. It probably wasn't even hard to convince because he is a disturbed individual. He is the sort of guy who goes on the deep web to try and get into a red room to watch people get tortured, and he also loves to try to make us watch it. We went into the garden and Ian started digging up the area where she was buried. My brother and I were a few meters back anticipating what was to come. Ian hit the coffin, so we all picked up the coffin and laid it on top of the grass. Ian swung the case open. Ian's face went pale and he looked as if he was about to be sick. My brother and I were horrified. I looked at him and he had that sort of I told you face, but mixed with terror. In the coffin, our mom was there. She wasn't decomposed at all. She was in a fetus position where you hug your knees. Her eyes were open and bloodshot. Her nails were ripped in half off, presumably from scratching at the top of the coffin. Both her arms and legs were broken because she was pounding so hard on the coffin. As soon as we took it all in, Ian got sick all over her now dead body. Ian of all people, that's how horrifying it was. I realized that the crying that I heard the night before was hers, and what Ian heard was also her. We called the ambulance because we thought she might have still been alive. The autopsy showed us that she died at about the same time we opened the coffin. Only if she held on a little more she would have been alive. It has been a couple of months since this all happened, and every night I see my mom screaming and crying in her coffin in my dreams, and I swear when I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night I can still hear her muffled voice, and every time I look out the window I'm just greeted with that damn red oak tree with a patch of dirt where my mother was buried. The doctors told us that it was impossible that she was alive when we buried her in our garden, and it will forever remain a mystery. I am afraid to say that I think that I am losing my mind. Please make sure that the person you are burying is dead beforehand, because if they aren't dead they will die anyway. Story 10, Not everything in sleep paralysis is a hallucination. So ever since my childhood I've experienced sleep paralysis a lot more than the average person, and let's just say it's one of the most unpleasant things you can experience. Since childhood I've always had vivid hallucinations when I was experiencing sleep paralysis, and they've always scared me even to this day. This story is one of the most terrifying things that have and ever will happen to me in my lifetime. It all started in late January. I had just moved into this new house built in 1887. I got it for a good deal because it was supposedly haunted and no one else wanted to purchase it, but I've never really believed in the paranormal or anything like that, so I just saw the good deal on a decent-sized house and took it. A few weeks after buying the house, a big snowstorm hit one night, causing the power to go out and snowing me in. The power was out, and I couldn't see a thing, so I decided that I would head to bed early and get an early start on unloading boxes the next day. As I entered my bedroom I noticed the closet and bedroom door were both ajar, which was strange seeing as I knew I closed both before leaving for work, but I thought nothing of it. I hopped into bed, pulled my blankets over me and fell asleep in the pitch-black room. I awoke to the noise of clanging down in the kitchen. My fear started to rise that there could possibly be an intruder in the house with me, but when I attempted to get up to retrieve my baseball bat I realized I couldn't move. Oh great, sleep paralysis again, I thought to myself as I tried to move my legs. That's when a loud creaking sound could be heard from the other side of the room, where the bedroom door was located. I strained my eyes to try to see the door through the darkness, and I could see something. There was a tall, all-black figure standing on the other side of my bedroom door. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move anything and was forced to watch the figure slowly open my bedroom door. This hallucination was a lot more vivid than any other hallucination that I have ever had. I could hear every footstep the black figure made as it slowly creeped towards my bed. When it got closer I could make out some of the features of its face. It had a wide, inhuman, devilish grin and sunken black eyes that could strike fear in anyone. It continued to creep towards my bed before it reached the side of my bed and leaned down over my body. He just stood there for minutes, and it was lasting longer than any sleep paralysis I had ever experienced. I was just praying that it would be over soon, wanting this figure just to leave and never come back. My prayer was answered. I was finally able to move again, but something was wrong. The figure continued to loom over me even though my sleep paralysis. That's when the creature began to laugh. Its laugh echoed through my room, and in an inhuman voice it said, "Did you really think I was your imagination? I'll see you tomorrow night." The figure then turned around and walked out of the room. I got up as quick as I could to see where it was going, but when I looked out my door into the hallway, there was nothing there. This all happened last night, but the power and cell phones are still out from the storm and I'm snowed in with this thing. I am writing this now because the clock just struck 3 a.m. and there was a loud clatter in the kitchen. Story 11, When I was a kid, the children in my town started disappearing. I was one of the lucky ones. The newspaper headline glared at me from the table, an icy chill running down my back. A child had gone missing in town the previous night and authorities were looking for leads. My mind jumped to a summer 20 years previous when the children of the town had started to disappear. Glancing at my 8-year-old watching TV in the living room, I felt a heavy stone slide into the pit of my stomach. While I knew it couldn't be happening again, logic seemed to dictate this. Everything in me wanted to grab my child and flee. Midsummer, 1992, I was on the precipice of adolescence. I had always been one of the youngest in my class, with a midsummer birthday, so while my friends around me were enjoying the feeling of finally becoming a teenager, I spent most of my summer waiting impatiently to join them. I was almost certain that I would feel different, somehow. Older, wiser, more endowed. My best friend Michelle said that her boobs grew an entire cup size when she turned 13, but I never really knew if that was true or if it was just the point at which she discovered how to stuff her bra. Either way, being a solid A cup, I was excited to find out. There were other things that were enticing about turning 13. A later bedtime, babysitting jobs, being able to watch PG-13 movies, and that summer, it meant the difference between staying alive and disappearing off the face of the planet. I was spending the night at Michelle's house when we heard about the first disappearance on the evening news. We lived in a small town in upstate New York and everyone knew everyone in this town. The little boy's name was Anthony and he lived 3 blocks over from us. I'll never forget seeing his mother appear on the television while Michelle and I lounged on her couch with mouthfuls of Zebra Fun Stripe gum. The pained look in her eyes as she appealed to whoever took her son, to bring him home safe and unharmed has haunted me ever since. Anthony was 10 years old and went to our school. According to his mother, the last time she had seen him was earlier that day when he'd left the house to ride his bike around the neighborhood. When he didn't come home for lunch, she had gone looking for him. All that she had found was his bike, discarded on the side of the road near a stretch of trees that ran perpendicular to their street. It sent chills up my spine, thinking about the boy with sandy blonde hair and a face full of freckles being snatched off of his bike and stolen away, scared and alone. Parents in the 90s didn't worry about their children playing outside by themselves. Not like they do now. My own child isn't even allowed out in our front yard without myself or my husband being there. It was so easy back then to snatch an unsuspecting child. That summer, however, everything changed for the parents and the kids in my town. The second disappearance happened less than a week later. A little 7-year-old girl named Helen who lived on the other side of town. The parents had started to become a little more cautious, thinking twice about allowing their kids to wander the streets alone. But surely, in a group of other kids, they would be safe. How wrong they were. Helen had gone down to the neighborhood park with a couple of other friends. She played with them until she got hot and then she walked over to a small copse of trees on the edge of the playground to cool off in the shade. Her friend Kelly saw her standing there moments before she disappeared, a bright pink ribbon tying up her blonde ponytail high on her head. When the police were called to the park when Helen didn't return home, all they found of her was that pink ribbon tangled up in the undergrowth. Rumors were flying around the neighborhood at this point and everyone was scared. The town imposed a curfew for everyone under 18 but they didn't need to enforce it. No parent in their right mind was going to allow their children to wander the streets without them anymore, day or night. Both children had disappeared in broad daylight. Some older boys on my street swore they saw a tall man dressed in grey rags wandering the outskirts of town, while others claimed it had to have been Connor O'Keefe, the old recluse that lived in the dilapidated house right across from the Midtown supermarket. Despite the precautions taken by the town and the parents in it, the third disappearance happened just 5 days after Helen vanished from the playground. This time, it was an 11-year-old African-American boy named Jamie. I remember this one being the hardest and scariest of all. Jamie lived just 6 houses down from me. And he had disappeared in the middle of the night. Jamie's parents woke up that morning, hustling to get ready for work and went to wake him too, because some parents were now opting for babysitters for their older children while they were at work. Jamie's bedclothes were tangled up and hanging half off the bed. He was nowhere to be seen. Here's the kicker. The part that sent icy shivers hurtling through me even to this day. Jamie's 13-year-old brother was asleep in the bed across the room. John woke up when his parents began yelling Jamie's name. He had heard nothing and remained untouched in his own bed, sleeping peacefully. Who would come into a private residence, take one brother, but leave the other, a potential witness, untouched? I remember a sense of impending doom settling over our town after Jamie's disappearance. The curfews and the protective parents hadn't been enough. Jamie was snatched right out from under his parents' noses, in the comfort of his own home. Everyone was sure they or their children would be next as the days passed with no leads from the police. I was no longer allowed to have sleepovers at Michelle's house and Mom had even mentioned getting me a sitter while she was at work. At 12, almost 13, this was just about the worst thing that I could imagine, aside from being snatched out of my bed in the dead of night. 2 more children disappeared over the next week and a half, bringing the total to 5 missing children. A day after the last child disappeared, Mom sat me down and told me that we'd have to cancel my birthday party. While this was inevitable, I was really disappointed. I had been looking forward to celebrating teenagehood with my friends at the local arcade. To make it up to me, Mom bought a bunch of junk food and rented some movies, and we spent the evening before my birthday camped out in her bed, pigging out on Doritos and watching Sister Act. When the movie ended, I glanced over at Mom and she was passed out on top of the covers, her lips parted slightly and light snores drifting through the air. I clicked off the TV and slid underneath the covers. Since the disappearances had started, I had been spending many nights in her queen-sized bed with her. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a small bump and a light scuffle from the direction of my bedroom down the hall. I was frozen with fear. I was so scared I couldn't even call out to my mom. I pulled the covers up my face until nothing but my eyes were visible. In my silent panic, I glanced at the clock and saw that it was 5 minutes until midnight, until I would officially become a teenager. I could hear the bumping/thumping noise in my bedroom still, and then, I was sure, it moved into the short hallway between the two bedrooms. Bump thump. Bump thump. I shook violently and tried to get a grip on myself so that I could scream, but it was no use. Nothing but a hoarse rasp would come out of my mouth as the bump thump moved closer to my mother's open bedroom door. Through the door I could see nothing but deep, swirling darkness, but I was sure that whoever or whatever had taken the other children had finally come for me, and here I was, just lying there, waiting for it to get me. I'm trembling even now, thinking back to the moment the darkness finally parted and revealed what was moving down the hallway. I have convinced myself, all these years later, that I didn't really see what I thought I saw. That I had actually drifted off to sleep, and I was remembering a very vivid nightmare. But some nagging little voice in the back of my head always whispers to me in my moments of doubt that it was real. Incredibly and inexplicably real. As I lay there, the clock ticking towards midnight, the bump thumping stopped and I started to breathe a sigh of relief. Then, just as I had started to convince myself that I was hearing things, something emerged from the darkness. Slow and labored as if each step was painful, a creature stepped fully into my mother's bedroom. My eyes widened at the sight, but still I could not find breath to scream. The figure was human, or human-like anyways. A lumpy head topped with dirty, stringy black hair. Mottled skin stretched across a face that leered at me silently. A beady black eye peering out from beneath the mass of tangled hair. Here the human likeness ended, however, for the creature looked to be a composite of random body parts, like a careless patchwork of human pieces sewed together on a whim. A thin arm covered in freckles protruded from a shoulder much too large for it, which moved into another arm sticking out at an odd angle from the other too big shoulder. The second arm was longer, more muscular, and was reaching toward me, scraping at the air with clawed fingers. The creature's left leg was longer than its right, and the skin was a smooth dark brown color. On its bare chest the vague shape of a face protruded from the blotchy skin, its mouth locked in a silent scream. It shuffled forward silently but for the bump thump as its mismatched legs moved unevenly across the wooden floor. I squeezed my eyes shut tight and waited for it to take me. I could hear deep, labored breathing that gurgled with a sickening wetness with each exhale. Beside me, my mother stirred and rolled over in her sleep, her snores hitching in her throat. I opened my eyes and saw that the creature had frozen at the movement beside me and was just staring at me with those black and soulless eyes. I silently begged my mother to wake up, to save me from this thing. When she didn't wake up, the glint seemed to return to the creature's eyes and it began its pained and lopsided shuffle once again. Within inches of the bed now, a smell so powerful that my eyes water even thinking of it, washed over me, drowned me. It was an earthy smell not unlike moss or mold, but it was overridden almost entirely by the sweet smell of decay and rot. I gagged involuntarily as the creature moved closer. This seemed to break my fear-induced paralysis and I searched frantically for some weapon to defend myself from the beast looming over me. The only thing on the bedside table was the alarm clock and a small ceramic lamp. As I reached across the table to grab the lamp, I watched as the bright blue digital numbers flashed from 11:59 to 12 o'clock. I thought ruefully how ironically tragic it was to be born and to die on the same day. As my hands closed around the lamp, the creature suddenly reared back as if in pain. It stumbled and flailed at the air, a look of rage moving across its ugly face. And then, with a silent scream, the thing vanished. The disappearances in town stopped just as quickly and unexpectedly as they had started. There was never anyone convicted of the crimes and none of the children were ever heard from again. Slowly, people in my town began to heal and to trust again. But not me. I knew that the police had been looking in the wrong place all along, but no one would ever believe what I had seen that night. No one would ever believe that I had almost been the sixth victim.